there is this tendency for people to think that collaboration is like, kind of one of those posters where everybody's holding hands.
Nope.
And it's not, right? In an effective organization, you want people bumping up against one another. You want them to be direct with their feedback. You want them to be resilient and not take personally a conversation around ideas, right? You want people to understand that you can't have a great debate when 50 people are in the room. You want people to understand that a mark of a great debate is it ends, right? We've all, and when it ends, regardless of the side that we were on, we're all in as a group going out, so that nobody knows which side you were on based on how you execute afterwards.
Hey Joel, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
I'm great. Thanks, Chris, for having me on the show. It's a real privilege to be here.
Good to see you. I love how organized your background is. It's way too organized for my liking.
Okay. Well, fortunately, the camera only points in this direction.
Oh,
if you saw
okay.
the other side, it's complete chaos.
That's the secret.
Yeah, the background's...
I love the picture right above your head. It looks really cool. Is that like pencil?
It is. Yeah. It's sort of it's kind of a mountain in the background. It's got sort of an education vibe to
like
it. Yeah.
It's really cool. Like we were talking just before we hit record about the way we learn, right? And which we'll get into today. And I love the work that you're doing. And one of the things I didn't say, which that reminded me of, is whenever Shane and I create our business plan or a launch for our product, I don't write out the business plan. I draw it. So rather than writing, here's the next 3 to 6 months, I actually paint or draw it. And then different objects in the painting represent the different milestones of what we're trying to achieve. So like I did one recently where, the trees in the painting represented the new employees I wanted to hire and grow and develop. And then we had a kind of a stream coming down to a waterfall, which represented the journey that we were about to go on as well, and the mountains. And so when rather than having a list of bullet points on my business plan, I just had that on my wall at home that represented to me every day I saw it. It brought it to life. Beyond here's some bullet points. How exciting is that about what we're going to create, right? Or a deck.
Yeah. So what I love about that, right, is we talk about the importance of passive versus active learning, often, but I think we tend to narrow very much the way we think about like what active learning, has to mean, right? And so like we think like, oh, a seminar rather than a lecture. That's the major distinction between passive and active learning. But like what you're pointing to is no, really it's just trying to bring in other senses, sense of movement, sense of touch, right? Having hearing in addition to seeing, in addition to having kind of a muscle memory. That's what really deepens and frankly motivates the learning experience. So that's a great example.
Yeah, it came to me because we went to a master class where we kind of was all around kind of understanding your why and connecting your why personally to your work. And at the end of it, everyone had to come up with a purpose statement, and you'd write it down, and they're like, carry it with you, take it, make it part of it. And I was like, had it written down. I was like, it's very boring. Not really. Like for me personally, a lot of people were really excited that they had a sentence. I was like, this is supposed to be my purpose statement. So I did this. That was that was the first time I drew it and painted the piece of art that represented my purpose and the why. And then from there onwards, I was like, actually, I'm just going to do this with anything I want to achieve or my goals in life, and then just have it placed around the house or the workplace, so it is a visual representation of what I want to achieve. And everyone was I did get some strange looks because I did it at the event. So at the end, everyone presented their sentences, and I was like, "Here's." I actually had a piece of like white whiteboard paper. It was like scruffy whiteboard paper with marker pens, and I was like, "Here's mine," of what it is.
Right.
Listen, before we jump, go on. Sorry,
Yeah.
go for it.
No, I was going to say it points to the power of visualization.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
which
and I'm a big fan of that. You know, like always had a vision board as a kid. Growing up, all my friends were like, "What is that on your wall?" And I was like, "These are all the cutouts of all the things I'm going to achieve in life." And everyone's like, "You know, that was one of the first things. Visualization is huge. It's so important."
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I'm not a religious person, but honestly, I don't know how to explain some of the things because a lot of times I've put things on my visualization board or just visualize them in my mind intentionally, and the amount of things that have come to fruition in my life that I just could not explain to you. But your subconscious mind finds it. You know, starts to pick it up like during the day without you even realizing, because you can train it, right, to be able to do that. And when I first heard about that, I was like, yeah, whatever. Like, it's like very. And then the more I started to do it, and the more be intentional every day about like even when I go to sleep, I visualize like what it would feel like to achieve that, and like as if you've already succeeded, right? Whatever it may be. I used to do it with sports. A lot of athletes do it actually. You know, you see, you hear about a lot of athletes, basketball players, ice hockey players, about visualizing hitting the shot, or in Shane's case when he played ice hockey, hitting the save, right, as well. And when you visualize that, it's incredible how if you keep doing it, your game gets better, your shot becomes better, because you can even almost play basketball in your mind before you hit the court.
Yeah,
as well.
That's great. It's a great example.
Yeah, and then I love kind of what you're doing, because you're bringing that to life through technology, right? And making learning accessible and personalized in a way that we just couldn't do before. But before we do that, tell everyone a little bit about your background, because it's super interesting and unconventional to your journey to where we are now.
Yeah, I began my career as a professor, as an academic. I taught at the Stanford Business School for 11 years in organizational behavior and strategy, and then became senior associate dean. I then went to Harvard, where I was a professor in the business school as well as in sociology. Sociology is what my degree is in. Then became dean of the Yale School of Management, and that was when I got recruited by Apple to start what and still is Apple University. I had the privilege to report to Steve and to Tim during my time there. I also ran HR at Apple for 3 years. And at the same time, Apple University was very much my passion while I was there, and now I'm CEO of Honor Education, which is focused on reimagining learning in light of the best technology that we can bring to bear on it.
Yeah, I don't even know where to start, because it's such an interesting. What was the how did the transition go from education to Apple? Like, how did that?
Yeah,
I love to hear that story.
yeah, no, and a lot of people, who kind of saw me as being, on an academic path, were like, how can you make that shift from a job that, once you get tenure, you have lifetime employment, to working for somebody who had a very strong reputation for, sort of deciding very quickly that you are no longer right for the job. Let's put it that way.
Especially at the time when you joined.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So here was the fascinating thing for me about Apple. Apple is functionally structured as a company. It has one P&L till this day, so no separate business units for iPhone, iPod,
Really?
Whatnot. Yes. And so the CEO is the first person, like if you're looking at like where does marketing, manufacturing, R&D meet, it's up at the CEO. What comes with that is you're essentially organizing by expertise as opposed to organizing by a business. that's the way academia is organized. So it was actually easier for me to make the transition to Apple because I immediately got that structure. I think the people who wrestle with that are the ones who've operated in a more traditional business unit organization, and then they come here to Apple and they want to know what's my P&L, what's my head count, and the answer is, well, that's all determined very centrally. If you've got a great idea, there will be resources to support it. But ultimately, it's your job to be able to be accountable for delivering with collaborating with others over whom you have no control. And again, that's just like academia, right? You're accountable for collaborating with others for whom you have no control. When you're a dean, like it's the faculty who are there permanently, you're the one who's the temporary help. So, so it actually, it was a more seamless transition than people would think.
Would you say then that Apple was one of the early companies to become more of a skills-based organization? Everyone's on this journey now to remove silos, to remove functions, become more collaborative, and focus on
Yeah.
skills rather than.
So I probably word it slightly differently. It's an expertise-based
Okay,
organization.
expertise-based organization, which is still a far
Yeah,
far far away from the traditional.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah. I mean, the principle that you're trying to apply is you want the people who have the expertise to have the decision rights, and you want them in the room when the decision is being made.
love it.
That tends to be easier to do when you're in a smaller organization. When you get to be 180,000, how you get that to work, that becomes more challenging. That was one of the reasons Steve created Apple University. Was there are distinct aspects of the culture, there's distinct aspects of the organization that need to be in place in order for that model to really work at scale.
Yeah. With that model, then, what were the uh, benefits, obviously, to that model, but also what were the challenges that come along with it?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I mean, having taught about organization design for many years, I always say, like, there's no perfect organization design in the abstract, and there's no perfect organization design for any organization in the specific. You basically have to decide what are the problems that you don't want to deal with and what are the problems that you do want to deal with, right? And so with a functional structure, the problems that you don't have to deal with is you don't have to deal with generalists making decisions where they don't have the expertise themselves in order to make those decisions. Um, you don't have to worry about lining up accountability and control because there's one person who's got budget
Yeah.
and they've got a set of targets, and you're going to hold them accountable to that. In a functional organization, you have to worry about, well, who's accountable when everybody's accountable, right? You have to, worry about how do we get collaboration across these different functions and these different areas of expertise, when each area of expertise has its own way of approaching things, right? Software engineering is different than hardware engineering, which has a different mindset, than marketing and finance, and you can sort of go through, and you've got to get them all to work without, having, that one person that everybody reports into, because while everybody does at the end of the day report into the CEO, if the CEO is having to sort of go into and create coordination throughout a 180,000 person organization, the organization, comes to a halt. Um, so so you get the expertise, you get the this is, and then but if you've got a really focused strategy and you've got a really strong culture, that can pull everything together. And so a big part of making something like that work is, you know, committing to that level of focus, committing to the things in the culture that allow for different functions to resolve differences of views and perspectives because they're anchored in that same set of beliefs around the experience that they're trying to create for their customers.
It's so interesting. Do you think that was one of the main reasons why Apple continues to move quickly, stay innovative, disrupt themselves is due to that model?
I think it makes a huge difference that the people at the top of the organization have the expertise and the intuition that comes with it around how, when there's uncertainty about how the world is going to unfold, to have to be able to essentially place the right bets. It doesn't mean they're going to be right all the time. At the end of the day, they're bets. It's always about probabilities. But more often than not, right? It does give you that ability to use the Wayne Gretzky quote, see where the puck is going to be, as
Mhm.
opposed to, sort of looking at where it is.
Yeah, I love that. Where did you start when you built Apple University? It seems like a monumental,
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually a funny story. So when I started Apple University, I knew when I was in academia it would take me like, sort of 3 or 4 months to build out a course. And I thought, okay, you're at Apple, you're gonna have to do
Yeah.
this quickly. This is Apple, right? In like my first 2 weeks, I started sketching out what that would look like. And I had, even though he wasn't CEO at the time, he was COO at the time. I had the privilege to meet with Tim Cook really early on. I started walking him through what I was about to do, and about like 2 minutes in, he sort of pauses me and he says, what you came up with might be right, and it may be wrong. um, but it would be great if you would get to really know us first before you start building something out.
Yeah.
And that was absolutely like the best advice anybody could have provided me, because it absolutely gave me the patience. Um, and this was something Apple was always really good at, was the ability to sort of give patience for the things that needed it, even as they're trying to be fast around those things that don't allow for it. And the other thing, and this is one of the things that I think is a mistake when CHROs or CLOs are building out learning programs, is they'll focus on the vision in the large, right? By which I mean, okay, what's the full matrix of across all our employees, all the programs that we're going to develop? And, there's sort of a whiteboard somewhere that's got this matrix filled out, and then all the skill competencies that are going to be addressed, and so on. Steve allowed for me, and again, it was a real gift, but it was also, I learned from this, is he essentially said, let's begin with the vision in the small, like what one really, really great learning experience would be like. Because if you can like
Yeah.
build one really great class where the people who come to it say like, I need another, I want to tell everybody they've got to go through this, right? You'll get to that vision in the large. But so often I think we feel this pressure to build out this massive vision before we've kind of figured out what's the experience that we want. And in some ways I had already, just because of the experience teaching at Stanford and Harvard and Yale, kind of had focused on experience, but it was just not, it was more than an affirmation. It was sort of an endorsement that, get this right, get this as great as it can be, and then scale it. Don't scale and then sort of figure out at scale what you think great could look like, because now you've confused the vision in the large with the vision in the small.
Yeah. Now that's so. I suppose Apple made that same approach when they built out their App Store, because like they slowly, one by one, released and everything. The first kind of original set of apps that they released were just mind blowing.
Yeah.
They brought out, but they could have easily put 20, 30 apps out there as well, and that first impression is so important. Like you only get people's attention once. And if you don't make a good first impression, so what I feel like what you've done really well, which is I hear from many CHROs that I interview who join businesses for the first time, is they really spend the first 6, even 12 months going on that sort of listening tour, really
Yeah.
truly understanding the business. And I spoke to a Citra recently that she's like, I've been on the plane pretty much every day for the whole year, like flying around the world. And one of the locations, she was in one of the mines, like on
Right.
the giant diggers in the middle, like in the mine, because she's like, I really want to get to know what the
Yeah.
challenges are, like not just I'm riding around in a construction site right in the middle of a mine in Africa, to get to know it and then go about making change, right? And really understanding the business, and people go, okay, she gets it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, when I used to teach, one of the pieces of advice I would give my students is integrate before you differentiate.
Oh
You're
yeah.
going to be much more effective in where you want to lead people if they get that you get them. Um, and that's important. And the other thing that is also important in that, because yes, I also talk to a lot of CHROs or CLOs who, talk and about the importance of going on the listening tour. Um, the one thing I try to add to that is make the transition gradual. Don't like abruptly say like I'm going to get to month 6 and then I will come out with my plan.
Yeah.
Because I think there is this tendency to like, say, okay, I'm going from listening mode to, use your word, choose your whatever word you like, advocacy mode, leading mode, whatever it is. The problem with that is you're sort of formulating these hypotheses. You can't help but do that during those first 6 months. You lose the opportunity to get some feedback on your
If you
hypotheses,
go all
right?
in.
So, right,
Yeah.
if you kind of right, if you go from asking a lot of questions, and I've seen that mistake too. So, while you're on the listening tour, say, I'm thinking about this, or I've got some thoughts that this could, maybe be a way to go, and I'd love your feedback on that. And if you make that a more gradual transition, I find that's an important thing to add into the listening tour is start putting some ideas out there just for people to poke at them, and
Yeah.
it'll be more helpful.
It's the same in a startup world with our products, right?
A hundred percent,
I get them out there as soon as possible. start
a
start
hundred
start
percent.
getting feedback, right? Because you could spend all this
Right,
time and months building, and then you launch, and then you're like, wait a minute. I wish I would.
right, right,
I wish I would have put this out earlier to get some feedback, because I just wasted so much
right.
time building. I'm sure you get that more than anyone,
Yeah.
as well. What were the main in the Apple University? What were the main skills or areas that really you're focusing on in terms of the upskilling and reskilling?
So collaboration is huge. And what does that look like? I would often say at Apple, collaboration was a contact sport. Because I think there is this tendency for people to think that, collaboration is like, kind of one of those posters where everybody's holding
Nope.
hands. And it's not, right? In an effective organization, you want, people bumping up against one another. You want them to be direct, with their feedback. You want them to be, resilient, and not take personally a conversation around ideas, right? And you want people to understand that you can't have a great debate when 50 people are in the room, right? You want people to understand that when, that a mark of a great debate is it ends, right? We've all,
Yeah.
um, and when it ends, regardless of the side that we were on, we're all in as a group going out, so that nobody knows which side you were on based on how you execute afterwards. Those are all things that you can say. You need to sort of ground it in cases and stories that demonstrate it, that create a sense of empathy for how hard that can be in the
Yeah.
moment.
Hmm.
Um, but collaboration is big. Another thing, is, um, at Apple in particular, which I think they're known for, is incredible attention to detail. Uh, in in order to make that functional organization work, you need leaders to know the details, three levels down or more in the organization. And it was a place that no matter how detail oriented somebody was when they got there, they realized that they're being asked to be more attentive to detail than any place that they've been. If my slides when I was, sort of giving a presentation, if it's a couple pixels off, you could see, like, there'd be people in the room and be like, I think the pixels, I mean, it would literally be like that, like musicians who hear a note if it's just slightly out of tune, right?
Yeah.
Like, so, yeah, things like that.
I drive my co-founder crazy with stuff like that because he will have
Hmm.
something which is like slightly 1 millimeter out of line in the presentation, and I can't unsee it. And he's like,
Right.
what? He's like, what are you even looking at? I'm like, look, that is not exactly in line with that. And he's like, really? I'm like, yes, really, as well. I want to go back to your collaboration point though, because
Yeah.
I love that, and I can see how that makes perfect sense because you don't get the type of innovation that Apple created by having the nice fluffy poster on the wall, like you just said. And I'll give you a good story actually. Today, JC, my editor, came into the to the office, and I said, "Oh, I didn't know you was even in because you didn't come upstairs and say hi." He was like, "No, I came upstairs, but it was seemed pretty heated, so I didn't come in the room." I was like, "What do you mean?" And what he didn't realize is we were all standing in front of our whiteboard as a team having quite a heated debate about some of the new products we're building, a healthy debate, a really exciting, right? But there were some disagreements, like to your point, and it was so, like, that's part of our culture, right? And I say, like, if there isn't friction and we're not kind of disagreeing on things, then we're not really innovating and challenging ourselves. But it's taken a long time for us to get there. Shane and I have always been like that. We've worked together for 20 years. We even grew up as childhood friends, and that's quite hard to separate your ego and emotions when it's your friend. It's even harder to be able to do that. But we always say to the team a couple of things. Assume positive intent, right? So always assume that.
Right.
So whenever you're getting feedback or someone's giving you, they're not doing it because they want to attack you or belittle you in front of the group. It's they're just being honest and open, and that's something that a lot of people are. It takes a bit of time, and not every, and it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest, that culture is not for everyone. I had an employee a few months back say, "I can't believe so and so said that to you. You're the CEO of the company. How can they disagree with you? You're the CEO." And I was like, "Well, why did you think I hired them?" Like,
Right.
that's the whole point. That I hired them to get a diversity of thought, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't know that I never worked in a company that you could challenge the CEO before." As well, and the other thing is around, to your point, making sure when we do come out of that, there is a clear call to action, a plan of action, and even if we disagree, we, like you said, fully support that individual, and that's also something which can be quite tough as well. Like,
Yeah.
I've come out of meetings where I completely disagree with my team as a CEO or founder, and I'm still going, like, I want, even if I know literally they're going to fail, I want to give them the opportunity to at least try,
Right.
and I don't want to rob them of that, if that makes sense, to be able to do that. So I love that. Practically, how do you do that though, at scale?
Yeah. So, it ends up being like a lot of little things. It would be nice to say, okay, here's the one thing to do, but, like, let me just take off of your last comment, and I'll even talk about, like, one of the things that I did, like, with my team at Apple University, because I absolutely had the same thing where, like, we have a meeting. I think, based on all my experience, like, this idea is going nowhere, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of enthusiasm, and it's the kind of thing that I'm like, okay, I'm willing to let them take a shot at it, and I'll support them in it. Whenever we would have our next quarterly meeting, any of those ideas that I thought were, ridiculous ideas, but I kind of let them, and I was wrong, I would say like, okay, here's the ideas like we talked about that I thought was like, and there was one that I was really thought was no way it was going to succeed and turned out to be one of the best ideas that came out of Apple University. And I would go back to that because I think that gives people the tenacity to push on me
Yeah.
as the leader of the organization, and I want them to have that. Powerful things somebody can do in an interview with me when I'm interviewing them for a job is they can change my mind about something that I've thought about. That, I mean, uh, that's one of like the best gifts I feel like somebody can give you is when you've actually thought pretty deeply about something and they like all of a sudden are like, you may have thought you thought deeply about this, but here's another perspective
Yeah.
and another experience, and so maybe you need to evolve that. Like, and I think when people see you are sincere in that, and you know that I at least when I've worked for people who I know are sincere in that, it's so motivating,
Yeah.
right? Like, and so that's one of the things that you can emphasize is being very public as a leader about changing your mind. And the impact that others have on it. It's important to be decisive in a direction that you're going. You don't want to like hedge. I working with one of our clients, they've got a phrase that they use a lot, which I really like. We want strong opinions weakly held, um,
I love
and
that.
and I think that is a great mindset to cultivate. I am firmly committed to this until data presents itself that leads me to be firmly committed to something else.
Well, that's why you get the people that can disconnect sort of their ego. Because some people,
Yes.
you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I could deeply hold a belief, and it can become almost part of my identity. So then,
Yes.
when you're challenging that individual, they almost see it as you're challenging their value, right, and their identity,
Correct.
and even though they can see the data, and they can see the result, they still, will combat that. And I think that's something me and Shane have done really well over the years. There's things that I've like deeply held beliefs that Shane, I'm like, I just put that trust in each other, that and it just, like you said, I've had the same things where there's things that the team proved me completely wrong. And I think one thing I've taken away from your advice is I don't do a good enough job of mentioning that, of bringing that back up,
Mm.
because it's very easy to say you were wrong and I was right, but when things go right,
Hmm.
people don't then sit down and go, actually, you were right, because we just accept that it
Right.
was right and we carry on. So I need to make space in our meetings in the team to actually like bring that up as well. So that's definitely something I'll take away from this conversation, because it's very easy to point out when things go wrong, but when
Right.
when things are going right, no one even mentions it because it's going right.
Right. Right. Right now, everybody just takes collective
Yeah,
credit,
yeah,
in terms of like how wise we all are, right?
yeah.
As
I
opposed
just
to there was a moment.
there was.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start paying more attention to that, because I think it's going to create even more psychological safety if
Mm.
I can make that happen
Yeah.
as well. So moving on to where we are now, where did the idea behind Honor come from?
Yeah. The idea for Honor emerged during COVID, when, because both because Apple University was almost all in-person teaching.
Oh, we should have mentioned that part. So it was mainly
Yeah,
in person.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It was almost all in person. Steve was very influenced by the seminars that he was at, for his year at Reed, and that kind of environment. Um, I've been a case teacher my whole professional career. So for me, teaching isn't, just kind of like what I can put into people. It's what I can pull out of them, different backgrounds, different perspectives, different experience around, something that our learning is focused on in common. And you couldn't get everybody into a room. And somebody who's good teacher, and I had many great teachers at Apple University, they can be reasonably compelling on Zoom, but not nearly for the length of time, right? And
Yeah.
so we had programs that were running, 2, 3 days or for a whole day, across consecutive weeks. We just knew we weren't getting that level of engagement. I had the privilege to be teaching a class with Greg Christie, who headed up Apple's human interface team for 15 years. So Mac OS, iOS, even the iPod operating system. That was Greg and his team. We just started talking, at one point about like what would it be to create great collective asynchronous engagement between the live sessions? Because everybody was trying to figure out how do you
Yeah.
make the Zoom session better. But if you think about other areas where we're collectively, engaged for good or bad, like, the social network applications, it doesn't depend on people being logged in at the same time. And yet there's still this sharing. But how would you do that putting a learning artifact at the center? How would you do it when you want sustained learning over, a rich and complex topic, not just people, posting one picture or shooting out, sort of a quick comment and then moving on to the next? Um, and how could you do it on people's mobile device so that they can have anywhere, anytime learning and collective engagement at the same time? That's the problem we sought to solve. Um, and we realized like if you solve that, that was way bigger than how could Apple University get itself through COVID. You could change something in education that hasn't changed for hundreds of years, whether or not you're talking corporate or higher ed, which is the scale economies at which it operates, right? Because you're actually shifting the amount of instructor time to learning time. You're making it possible for people, to learn, kind of learn remotely, but also collectively. And given the way work is today, that just seems such a powerful thing on which to focus.
We spoke about this when we first met, how bad the experience was when everyone first shifted in the pandemic, and we're kind of using things like Zoom and other tools and sort of hashing things together to try and create an experience.
Yeah.
Were you surprised that there wasn't a tool that already existed?
I was shocked, right? I mean,
Did
I
that?
was absolutely shocked, right? I mean, here's the basic statistic, right? $450 billion is spent on corporate training every year. 9% of those who are in charge think that their organizations are effective in training, right? Like, just try to make sense out of that. The amount of money that's being spent,
Nine
and
percent.
right? I mean, imagine, if only 9% of car owners thought their cars were effective at what their cars were supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a huge amount. And I think, the fundamental reason why is the technology has been so focused on delivery, on taking content, right, from here and sort of bringing it to where the individual is. It's not focused on, going back to what we were talking about before, it's not focused on the experience, right? And there are two aspects of the experience that I think are particularly important. One is, what is the content and where is it coming from? So many organizations are bringing, third-party content in from the outside in order to for even their most important courses around
It's crazy.
how do we lead, how do we develop our leaders. I mean, we were talking before about, Apple's unique organization. If Apple brought content from the outside, and this was Steve's thinking with Apple University, if Apple brought content from the outside, he said this, like they'd have to unlearn half of what they learned, right? What you want to have a great learning organization is you need a great teaching organization first, right? You want a way to pull from your own expertise within the organization. And that requires a tool for somebody to be able to build out a course that's as easy as building out a PowerPoint or a keynote deck,
Well,
right?
that
And
was
that's
always the objection, right? The objection in the past was it's too much of a heavy lift. It's too
Right.
expensive, right?
So that's sort of one thing you need. And the second thing that you need is, and I mean, you and I were just talking about this with respect to a great, sort of a great debate, is how much are your ideas made better when you've got other people in the room wrestling with them and challenging them? If if everybody is just learning by, us accessing content on our own without the different experiences, perspectives, insights, wisdom of others, it so lowers the impact of learning. I've learned so much more through my career because of who else has been in the room with me. And so, in addition to that teaching tool, what you want is you want a learning tool that essentially brings everybody's observations, reflections, comments together as they're going through the material, at their own pace and their own time. And that's a design problem to solve, right? Like, how can you, being a late night person and me being, an early morning person, going through the content at different times, be aware of how each of us is reacting and responding? But that's what we've built Honor to do, is to kind of share those observations and reflections around the content in ways that are easy to understand, easy to interpret, easy to get that broader collective sense.
Yeah, I love that. It kind of you just basically built almost the technology version of what we described earlier in terms of the collaboration, the ideation
Yeah.
that comes together. So just walk us through quickly how like the idea of communicating and connection when you're going on a learning pathway. What does that look like? How does that show up? Is it a nudge? Is it, you tag in a colleague to talk to them? Like, because we've seen traditional like learning platforms try and do that and fail miserably, where they have like a comment section. Like that was their version, right? And it was just crickets. Like no one was using it, right? How did you reimagine that?
or discussion boards that exist in a learning system.
And there's
right?
not we launched one years ago, and me and Shane were like, what's going on? We've got all these chief HR officers in here, but the discussion board's just empty. And we made boards for each topic, thinking they will be full of ideas and and communication.
Right. So to me, it goes back to, when I teach and I want a really high level conversation around something, I need to have in front of everybody what it is that we're talking about. It could be, some points on a slide. It could be, a story, a case, and, we've got some facts that are on the board, and we want to talk about those facts that we have on the board. What Honor does is we do that with all the learning content. So, you're reading through, a text, an article, you're watching a video. And as you are, we have, what we call, a reaction button, which, is all designed based on research that we know about digital highlighting, which is digital highlighting doesn't improve learning outcomes because it's too passive of an activity. And so what the design team thought really hard about was, how do we introduce some intentionality? In fact, we call it intentional highlighting. So if you, essentially tap something on your screen, up pop four choices. Is it important, for your job, your career, your life? Is it interesting? Who cares if it's important, but it's like a fact I, want in my digital notebook? Is it unclear? I've got questions. Or it's clear, but I still got questions because I'm not sure I agree with it. It's debatable. And so with a couple taps, you are essentially signaling, how you are responding. And then we give that as, essentially, a color-coded cue. As people are reading through the content, they can see, oh, people found this interesting or important or debatable. And you can go in and you can add additional comments. You can, record and, audio. You can, type it if you want, whatever it is. But in a way that is different than a comment section. It's always anchored at a particular location in the video or the text.
It's specific.
Right? Exactly. What makes those comment, sections or the discussion boards not work, and why it leads to like these low fidelity, very general reactions to things is you're sort of responding to the whole, not I love this line, or I'm not sure I understand this, or I disagree with what they're saying here because, and if you can, if you if you build the user interface to allow for that level of engagement, then you can start having asynchronously the kind of debates, conversations, learning experiences that you were talking about when you and your team get around the whiteboard.
I love that. So what it kind of reminds me of why social media works, because if you think about a TikTok video or an Instagram, but there's the reason the comment section's full is because it's around a specific thing. Right, so
Absolutely.
people, I don't agree with that. I do agree with that, or this is debatable. Like, it's that's the comment section of every social media post because it's specifically around that. To your point. So you're giving them an anchor almost to jump off of, like or a jumping off point to actually have a conversation. When you highlight, it's almost like highlighting in your book as well. Like you literally used to do.
Right.
How do you do I get notification if someone says something in there,
Yes.
how does that
Yeah.
how does that
That's
yeah
right. Right. That's the other piece, right? Which is, if you're a faster reader than I am, and you're, and you're faster than everybody, so you get through. You're not going to want to look back and see the comments, the reactions that people made. So again, in a way that is like the other applications we have in our lives, with notifications and then deep links back to the content, you can be taken to here's where there's an interesting conversation that took place around a particular paragraph. But you'll just see that in the notification. Or if I'm an instructor and I see that a lot of people, for example, marked something as, unclear, we've built it so that I, as an instructor, can just go in, record an audio clip or type some text that'll appear right alongside where they've marked unclear. And everybody will get notified the minute that is there.
oh amazing
So you're moving to much more of like an almost agile course creation methodology than, kind of a set and forget, sort of methodology, which is I think what so many of us are used to. That brings it all, full circle. I mean, we've got what we obviously survey, users on our platform a lot. Over 90% say, the platform by itself increases engagement. Over 90% say it increases comprehension. Um, and and there's just no doubt that that is because of that choice to link individuals around content at this much more specific level.
yeah it's so interesting that you're doing it in the flow of learning, because the way we've been looking at it with Atlas, our agent that we built, is what we're doing now, and maybe we need to maybe reassess that. You got me thinking. Is we ask the agent to go out for imagine if you're creating some learning materials or a learning pathway for sales, right, to upskill the sales team. What Atlas now will do is it will go and kind of survey the sales team and ask them questions. What's your challenges, etc. So we'll ask them a defined set of questions, and then based on all of that feedback that you now can gather from thousands of sales reps that you could not do manually because the AI is reaching out to them because we've connected it to Teams and Slack, so it can just message them, hey, we're thinking about doing this course around X, we want to get your feedback. If it gets all of the feedback, then it builds the learning pathway
Right.
based on the feedback. So it's not like someone in the L&D team thinking I know best or I know what our sales team needs. No, it's actually that. But what we haven't done is embedded it then in the learning itself the way that you have. It kind of ends there. So it kind of gathers the information, builds the learning pathway, serves it to the individual, but it doesn't have that interactive element that you described.
Right. Right. To sort of take what we're doing in your context, it would be then seeing as people are going through the material, what are the observations, thoughts, reactions that people have to, essentially, what's working for them, what was a new insight, what's an observation
Yeah.
in the material that now somebody doesn't agree with, and here's why they don't agree with it. and then you're elevating it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's for me why I go back to that, sort of fundamental idea, and why it's just so important to put human connection at the center of learning, right? Is you know the way in which the content can be made better and better over time by virtue of bringing that human interaction back to it.
And I think
Absolutely.
I mean, I've not heard of anyone doing what you're doing. Like, I think that's the missing
uh,
piece of the puzzle. Because, like, I always say to the team, like, it's the reason why my team comes in every Monday together face to face, because we
yeah.
haven't found a platform that allows us to have that type of dialogue and that debate, and the radical candor in our conversations that we have in person. I've just not found a way to do that over Zoom, like, and
Yeah, and
not in a meaningful way, and a way, to your point, that works for everyone. Because some people are in different time zones, some people are
right.
working at home, some off. So, like, I've just not found a platform that does that, that's engaging beyond, like, the comment walls and the comment
Yeah,
sections. And I'm like, this doesn't work. Like,
yeah, and just to be clear, I mean, somebody who, again, spent most of my life casing, I'm still a big believer in, getting everybody into the room.
mm,
I don't think we want to replace all of that. There are absolutely the moments, and in fact, I think they complement one another,
yeah,
right? Like,
yeah, yeah,
if you have that, kind of connection that you can build with people when you're in the room together, it actually is going to enhance the degree to which the comments, the observations that you make when you're apart are deeper or more pointed, because you've got that bond, that trust, that connection. So, what we just haven't had is the ability to keep the conversation elevated when we all leave the room and are in our own place.
yeah. We can't have this conversation without talking about the word, or about AI.
But we did a really good job of making it a long time without,
It's
right? I
true.
mean,
We got 9 minutes to
credit
go.
to us, but
9 minutes to go, and I was like, so, and I'm already thinking of what you just shared with me in the audience, like, of the way that AI can show up, and I can already imagine so many possibilities and the art of
yeah.
possible. How are you leveraging AI to further enhance the learning experience?
Yeah, I mean, two ways. One, which we've already alluded to, is how can you reduce the frictions, the difficulty, the challenge for especially those who are subject matter experts but not learning experts, to create a really engaging course, right? Because if you can do that, I mean, the ability to tap into that tacit knowledge, the expertise, the wisdom that's been accumulated in your organization over time, that's going to be such a powerful driver of content, right? So that's one. The second, is, and I'm particularly excited about this, is for organizations that have tens of thousands of employees, you probably don't want every one of the comments and reactions that 10,000 others are making, for people to scroll. It's just going to be overwhelming in terms of volume. So AI can do two things. One, it can summarize hundreds, thousands of comments really well in a way that can be respectful to how much time do you have and still pull the power of the collective. But more importantly, all of us are, learn in different ways, motivated in, sort of different ways. Some of us love to be, in a group with somebody who pushes us and challenges us. Others need a little bit more support from people who think like we think in order to have the confidence to make comments and observations. Because of the high fidelity data that we have for how people are reacting to the content and the comments that they make, we can do for learning at scale what essentially dating apps do for putting people together for dates, which is, I can put you together with your ideal cohort that motivates your learning. And as you grow and you develop, I can start bringing in other individuals who are going to enhance your learning. And so you take scale, which has always, since the beginning of time, been a disadvantage for learning,
Yeah.
and you actually make it an advantage, right? Who would want a dating app that only has 100 people on it, right? But when we talk about learning, we've always been emphasizing small for all the reasons that are obvious. But if I can have 100,000 people and I've got the profile of how they learn, what excites them, what motivates them, and I can just match you to them, so you have the soulmate equivalent of your learning cohort. Um, Imagine how much more motivating that would be to
Yeah.
people's learning, and that's what we can do now with AI.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I never even thought about it through that lens. Is there not a risk of surrounding yourself with people that have the same, just have the same thoughts and perspectives?
So that's a design choice, right? Like, and by the way, for me, I know I'm more motivated when I'm getting people who think
Oh, I
differently
see.
than
So,
me.
okay, so that could be
So,
okay. So it's not always a
right?
positive thing. You might actually have a cohort on purpose because you like being challenged.
Correct. And
Okay.
you can also build in, but there are some of us who need at least two or three people who think like us in a
Yeah, yeah,
group of
yeah.
15 or 20 to like have the confidence to express our views. Because for some of us, for maybe good reason, like we walk into a room and it's like, wow, maybe I don't know, so I'm just going to shut up, as opposed to, no, you just have a different perspective. So, but again, with enough scale, that's absolutely something that can get fine tuned. But I completely agree with you. The last thing that you would want to do,
Yeah.
and maybe that's why the dating and app analogy can be a little bit you know misleading, is you wouldn't want to just put people with people who think like them.
Yeah, because
You
innovation
want to
doesn't happen
put
that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But what you'd like to do is you'd like to put them with people who can express themselves and express a different view in ways that individual can hear,
I'm with you.
right?
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I've never even thought of that concept of even going down that. And we're running out of time. We have to do a part two because because I really want to understand how that then shows up what you've just described there. Because I don't think anyone's even tapped into that whatsoever. And I speak to many companies every single day about this as well. So there's something really interesting here. But before I let you go, where can people connect with you personally if they want to reach out, say hi, and where can they learn more about Honor?
So our website, it's very easy. It's honor.education. And they can reach out to me at either on LinkedIn or Joel at honor.education.
Amazing, Joe. I feel like I could speak to you forever. And I mean, I love what you're doing. I hope everyone listening goes and checks it out. All the links will be in the description. So wherever you're listening, watching right now, the links will be below to check it out. But I'm super excited. I'm glad we connected.
Thank you.
And
Yeah, likewise.
I wish you all the best until we next week.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's been a real pleasure, Chris. Thanks so much.